Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathasala. I am Dr. P. Nagaraj, Assistant Professor from Anna University, Chennai. Today we are going to discuss about Module A, Role of Carbohydrates in Biological Functions from the paper Structure and Function of Biomolecules. So, objective or overview of today's lecture is sources of carbohydrates, that means where sugar can available, which is again divided in subdivisions like a simple sugar or complex carbohydrates, again which is further divided into dietary and non-dietary fiber contents, and digestion and absorption, which is very important phenomena in our body functions. Apart from that, functions, whatever function can do by carbohydrate, and majorly we look at blood glucose regulations. That is a very important phenomena that also we will study in detail. Apart from that, dietary sweeteners, means artificial or natural sweeteners and its recommendations, and also we will study in details. So in case of types of carbohydrate, as we discussed, simple and complex, to broad way we can classify. Simple sugar means which it contain less number of monomers, that means monosaccharides or disaccharides are simplest form of carbohydrate. If it is complex, then you can go for more complex like oligosaccharides, which is again having 3 to 10 monosaccharide unit combined together will give oligosaccharides, and above that more than 10 or 12, which is comes under category of polysaccharide. Both oligosaccharide and polysaccharides are complex carbohydrates. Example for polysaccharides is a well-known examples is glycogens, starch and fibers. Glycogen is nothing but glucose. After eating, that glucose will be converted into glycogen, which is stored in our body. Whenever we require, the glycogen will convert it to glucose and energy will be supplied accordingly. Starch, which is again naturally abundant polysaccharide, and starch which is made up of glucose unit. Two glucose unit combined together will give ether linkage, which is in the form of alpha 1,4 ether linkage, that will produce starch. Fiber content, fiber which is another class of polymer. Example for fiber is a cellulose, is the simplest example of fiber polysaccharides. Again the glucose unit combined together will give a cellulose. Cellulose molecule which is linked 1,4 linkage, only the difference between starch and cellulose, which is in case beta linkage in cellulose, whereas alpha linkage in starch, that is 1,4 to 2 units. Again the classification of saccharides, the simplest classification is based on the monomer. First one is a monosaccharides, also known as single sugar. The simplest example of monosaccharide, which is glucose, which is having carbohydrate form used by the body, referred to as blood sugar. And the basic subunit of other larger carbohydrate molecules, also glucose found in fruits, vegetables and honey. Glucose having 6 carbon atoms and 1 oxygen at the ring, and which will make both alpha and beta. If presence of aqueous medium, will produce both form of glucose anomers. Again other monosaccharides is a well known, which is fructose and galactose. Fructose, which is also known as pentose, that means a 5-membered sugar ring which is present in the structure. Fructose is the most sweetest form of sugar available in nature, and it occurs naturally in fruits and honey, which is also known as fruit sugar. And in fructose combined with the glucose to form sucrose. So two important unit of sucrose, which is fructose and glucose, both have a C1 linkage, will produce a sucrose, which is a disaccharide. And another one important monosaccharide, which is galactose. Again the difference between glucose and galactose is C4 epimer. That means in case of carbon number 4, the hydroxy group present in the axial position, which is called galactose, and the hydroxyl group present in the equatorial position, which is called glucose. That is the only one difference. Apart from that, everything is same. In case of galactose, which is combined with the glucose to form lactose, which is generally known as milk sugar, So milk sugar which consists of two monomer, namely glucose and galactose, which deals with the disaccharides. So simplest well-known disaccharide, first one is sucrose. Sucrose, which is again made up of two monomer, namely glucose and fructose. Sucrose, also known as table sugar, which is available for getting sweet. The structure of glucose and fructose, which is combined in the alpha linkage, will produce sucrose as a disaccharide. Another class of disaccharide, which is lactose, which is also known as milk sugar, made up of glucose and galactose, which is again alpha linkage of 1,4 linkage. The third one is maltose, also known as malt sugar, which is again 1,4 alpha linkage of 2 moles of or 2 molecules of glucose unit will produce maltose. The complex carbohydrate, complex means which is oligosaccharide and polysaccharide, which will come under this category. Short carbohydrate chains of 3 to 10 monosaccharide, which is called oligosaccharides. Oligosaccharides found in legumes and human milks. Example of oligosaccharides are raffinose and stachyose. Cannot be broken down by a human enzyme, though it can be digested by colonic bacteria. In case of raffinose, which is made up of trisaccharide, that means 3 monomer unit present in case of raffinose, whereas in case of stachyose, which is having 4 monomer or simple sugar combined together, will produce stachyose, which is a tetrasaccharide, namely fructose and glucose, followed by 2 molecules of or 2 monomer like galactose, all of them linked via 1,4 alpha linkage except glucose linked with fructose. Complex carbohydrate again, which is polysaccharide, which is another class of complex carbohydrate. Long carbohydrate chain of monosaccharide linked by glycosidic bond. The bond may be either alpha or beta, depend upon the partner. The alpha bond, which is present in starch, comes under polysaccharides, whereas beta bond, which is present in fiber or cellulose. So in case of starch, the monomer glucose unit linked each other via ether linkage to produce a polymer or polysaccharides, that is in alpha linkage, 1,4 alpha linkage, whereas in case of same glucose unit linked with the other monomer via beta linkage will produce beta form. Example for beta polysaccharide, which is cellulose, the monomer which is linked via beta linkage, 1,4 beta linkage. Another class of complex carbohydrate, which is fiber, which is a dietary fiber and a functional fiber. 2 types of fibers are available. Non-digestible carbohydrates and lignin that are intact, intrinsic in plant, includes oligosaccharides, whereas functional fibers, isolated non-digestible carbohydrate that have beneficial physiological effects in humans. So these 2 types, dietary and functional fibers. In case of dietary fibers, found in all types of plants and foods, whereas refining removes fiber from whole grains and other foods, because fiber content we can't digest, there is no enzyme present digest fiber content in our body. So before taking any food items, we should remove or avoid the fiber contents. Digestions and absorption, which is a phenomena which will intake our body. A small intestine, what will happen? Pancreas secretes enzyme pancreatic amylase. That enzyme will be secreted in pancreas, which is present in small intestine. Enzymes located on the cell membrane of the intestinal epithelial cells complete digestions. So example, maltose, which is a disaccharide, which will convert to glucose and glucose, 2 units of glucose in presence of maltase as the enzyme. In case of sucrose, which will be converted to glucose and fructose in presence of sucrase as the enzyme. And in case of lactose, which is presence of glucose and galactose, can be obtained in presence of lactase as the enzyme. So these are all the enzyme. Maltose will be hydrolyzed using maltase, sucrose hydrolyzed using sucrase, lactose hydrolyzed using lactase will produce monosaccharide. All enzymes which will cleave the monosaccharide will cleave the disaccharide, produce monosaccharides selectively. One enzyme cannot do for other disaccharide, like suppose maltase selectively reduce maltose, not sucrose or lactose. Similarly, sucrase can do it selectively specifically on sucrose only, not with maltose or lactose. Vice versa, lactase can do it with lactose, it can't do it with sucrose or maltose. Digestions and absorption, again small intestines, only monosaccharides can be absorbed. That means glucose, galactose absorbed by active transport, whereas fructose absorbed by facilitated diffusions. So glucose, galactose are absorbed by active transport, whereas fructose, which is absorbed by facilitated diffusion. These two types of method, our monosaccharide can be absorbed in our body. Similarly, all three monosaccharides travel in the portal vein to the liver. 3 fats of glucose at the liver, energy, storage as glycogens, released to blood. These are all the functions of carbohydrate, especially digestion and absorption part. Deals with the large intestine. Whatever we have seen, that is in smaller intestine. Now we will see what will happen in case of large intestines. Resistant starches and fibers may be digested by bacteria and produces short chain fatty acids, which is absorbed by the intestines and used for energy, and other health benefits also available. So dietary fibers yield about 2 kilocalories per gram. So next important phenomena is lactose intolerance. That means you can't tolerate lactose. That is because which occurs as a result of insufficient lactase or low lactase activity. That means lactose is a disaccharide. If you consume the lactose, you need enzyme which is called lactase, which is will do the reaction or hydrolysis, will give galactose and glucose to monomer upon hydrolysis. If the lactase enzyme which is very less available, or if it is activity is very less, you can come across this kind of lactose intolerance situation. Lactose molecules from milk remain in the intestine, which is undigested. So whatever milk we are consuming, it should be get digest. For digestion of that, we need more amount of lactase and more active form of lactase. If amount of lactase is less, or even some amount is available which is less reactive, then this kind of lactose intolerance may happen. That means the whatever milk we consumed which is remain undigested. So lactose intolerance not equal to milk allergy. So undigested lactose digested by bacteria producing irritating acids and gas. So some bacteria, what it will do, it will give some acid and gas which will give irritation in our body. Symptoms of including bloating, abdominal discomfort and diarrhea. These are all the symptoms if you are facing lactose intolerance. That means low amount of lactase or less active lactase available in our body, the milk which is remain undigested. Alternatively, you can choose some other items to milk, especially calcium you can take, or vitamin D, or riboflavin. These are alternative to milk. If it is calcium which is available in canned fish with the bones, bone soup, stock, broccoli, cauliflower, bok choy, calcium fortified beverages and black stuff molasses. So these are all items where you can get excess quantity of calcium that can be used as alternative to milk. And also you can use vitamin D, which is available normally in sunlight. So 50 minutes exposure to sunlight several times per week. So many times, most of the day you show to your body to sunlight. From that you can get vitamin D, which is again alternative to milk. And fortified margarines, fortified cereals and fatty acids, herring, tuna, salmons, sardines, fortified soy or rice milk, which are all examples of vitamin sources, vitamin D sources. And another alternative to milk is riboflavin, riboflavin which is easily available in beef, chicken, liver, clams, mushrooms, broccoli, breads, and fortified cereals. So these are all the nutrient which is having excess quantity of riboflavin, so which is again alternative to milk. Any one of that we can use, or all the three we can use to alternative to milk, because we are facing milk as a lactose intolerance, so which is remain undigested in the body. If we are facing the problem, that means lactase which is less quantity available in our body, or which is remain inactive in our body. That is the situation. You can go for alternative of any of these. The first mention is it acts as a energy source. So glucose fuels the work of the most of the body's cells. So preferred fuel of nervous tissues, the brain, nerves and red blood cells, etc., which require energy which is easily available from glucose. Excess glucose is stored as glycogen in liver and muscle tissues. So whatever happen, whenever we are consuming food, that glucose which is undergo decomposition will give energy, whereas excess glucose which is absorbed from the body, which can be stored in the form of glycogen, whenever our body requires the glycogen again reconverted to glucose, and it will release energy. Another important class of function of carbohydrate which is sparing body protein. That means if diet doesn't provide enough glucose, means whatever taking food which is less number of carbohydrate which is available to our body, then other sources of glucose must be found with our body itself. If carbohydrate intake less than 50 to 100 gram, the body protein will be used to make glucose. So once the carbohydrate intake is less, what will happen? Our body having protein, that protein will decompose, will produce glucose, and that will serve as an energy source. Whereas inadequate supply of carbohydrate spares body protein from being broken down to synthesis glucose. So body protein, some of the amount will get converted to glucose, while this kind of non-availability of glucose in the dietary substance. Another very important function, preventing ketosis, that is anti-ketogenic. Carbohydrates required for the complete metabolism of fat, whereas incomplete fat metabolism produces ketosis. An adequate supply of carbohydrate, that is greater than 50 to 100 gram per day, prevents ketosis. Ketosis is nothing but the incomplete fat metabolisms. That means whenever the carbohydrate amount is required in the body, fat will decompose to produce glucose. To stop that, we have to take more amount of carbohydrate, that is greater than 50 to 100 gram per day. It will prevent the ketosis. That means that fat molecule will not undergo decomposition. Another class of complex carbohydrate which is fiber. I already discussed about fiber. Fiber is nothing but simplest form of cellulose. Again, cellulose which is made up of glucose monomer, which is combinedly will give polysaccharide or polymer, which is cellulose, which is again the linkage is 1,4 beta linkage between the two monomer sugar. So fiber which is beneficial for weight control by contributing to safety and delay gastric emptying, and also fiber which is very important thing is which is soluble fiber, lower blood cholesterol to help reduce risk of cardiovascular disease. That means if fiber which is soluble, insoluble, two types of fiber which is available. If which is soluble, that will dissolve and it will go to blood, that will reduce the cholesterol, so that we can avoid risk from cardiovascular disease and minimize risk of and help control of type 2 diabetes. That means the fiber can also involve controlling diabetes, type 2 diabetes especially. Diabetes, there are two types, type 1 and type 2. Both are genetic as well as other factor may contribute. So which is again the soluble fiber can reduce the type 2 diabetes. Insoluble fibers help promote intestinal health by enlarging stool size and easing passage to stool. So both soluble as well as insoluble fibers play a major role in the human body. In case of soluble fiber, again examples includes gums, pectins, mucilage, some hemicelluloses which are comes under this category like soluble fibers. Functions of these soluble fibers are delay gastric emptying and slow transit through digestive system and delay glucose absorptions, bind to bile, help decrease cholesterol. So these are all very important functions. And food sources, mostly soluble fibers available in fruits. If we can consume, then that will control at least 4 major part like bind to bile and help decrease to cholesterol. Cholesterol increases, then possibility of getting heart disease. So the soluble fiber can reduce the cholesterol amount. And delay of glucose absorption, that means it will make small delay, that is also good for our health. And the gastric emptying, whatever gas which is produced in the body, that also will be go out and transit through the digestive system. That means that is slow digestive system will helpful for a long-term effect. So these are all the benefits of soluble fibers. In case of insoluble fibers, and there are some examples include cellulose, hemicellulose. These are all comes under this category of insoluble fibers. Again, the problem is insoluble fibers, which is there is no such enzyme which is available in our body to digest those fiber. That is called insoluble fibers, which is again the linkage between one sugar unit to other sugar unit, which is beta in nature. The insoluble fiber also do some activities or functions like, which is speed transit through the digestive tract. That means it will digestive tract means that will go very fast or speed up the digestive process, and delay glucose absorptions, that is also another functions, and increases fecal weight and softens stool to ease passage, and it reduces risk of hemorrhoids, diverticulitis and appendicitis. So these are all the functions of these insoluble fibers. And sources of insoluble fibers, again cereal grains, legumes, vegetables, nuts, etc. will be sources for insoluble fibers. Glycemic index, which is classified food or meals based upon their potential to raise blood glucose level, which is expressed as percentage of response to a standard carbohydrate, usually white bread or per pure glucose. Why it is very useful? Decreased risk of NIDDM, heart disease and colon cancer. What is useless? The complex research may not be supported. So glycemic index is the phenomena where how much glycoside which is present in our body, that we can be estimate. High blood sugars, which is the diabetes. Diabetes, which is a two type. Type 1, which is insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, generally known as IDDM, or juvenile onset. Type 2 is a non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, which is known as NIDDM, or adult onset. There are two types of diabetes are known. High blood sugars, diabetes. What are risk factors if you have diabetes? Type 1 have genetic factors. If you have type 2, also it will affect the genetic factors. Greater than more than 45 years old, you may face overweight, sedentary, low HDL or high triglycerides, certain racial or ethnical groups, gestational diabetes. This kind of the risk you can face if type 1 and type 2 diabetes present in our blood sugar level. Again, high blood sugar, what are the consequences? If peripheral vascular disease, there is a possibility to get vascular diseases. The deteriorations of the eyesight, that means you may lose your eyesight. And that kidney diseases, kidney may get failure. And the next one is progressive nerve damage, then nervous system may get damaged, and most importantly, there is a possibility to get heart disease. Regulation of blood glucose. Optimal functioning of body is dependent on keeping level of glucose in certain parameters. Elevated blood glucose, that means higher amount of glucose present in blood, that is called hyperglycemia. In case of very low amount of glucose available in our blood, that is called hypoglycemia. The endocrine system is primarily responsible for regulating blood glucose. The two main hormones are insulin and glucagon, which is responsible for regulating the glucose level in the blood. So another important problem is diabetes mellitus. Again, the excess glucose present in the blood, that is called diabetes mellitus stage, a disorder of energy metabolism due to failure of insulin to regulate blood glucose. That is the criteria for diabetes mellitus, which results in hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia means excess glucose present in the blood level, that is called hyperglycemia. Acute symptoms, which includes thirst, increased urines productions, and hunger. These three are important symptom of diabetes mellitus. That means you polyphagia, polyuria, polydipsia. That means you will feel like to take water more frequently, and more frequently you will go for urine, and you may feel always hunger. Whatever amount of food you are consuming, that will not be sufficient to take care of your body energy. That means all the energy whatever produced from the food, it is going waste. So the long term consequences, which includes increased risk of heart disease, kidney disease, blindness, neural damage. This is a long term effect. There are two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2 available. In case of type 1 diabetes, accounts for about 10% of cases. So type 1, which is very less commonly available or commonly spread to the people, which occurs when beta cells of the pancreas are destroyed. That means the production of insulin will less. Insulin cannot be synthesized. Once if the beta cells pancreas are destroyed, that means it won't produce no more insulin. That insulin which is responsible for regulate the glucose level in blood. So without insulin, blood glucose level rises because the tissues are unable to access the glucose. Means whatever tissues which is present, that you have to absorb the glucose, that may not be possible without this insulin productions. Death occurs shortly after onset unless given injections of insulin. Artificially you have to inject insulin in order to maintain the glucose level in our blood. If you are not taking care, you may possibility to get death. And another class of diabetes mellitus, which is a type 2, again which occurs when cells of body are unable to respond to insulin. So type 2, which is suppose cells which is not respond to insulin, then you will get a type 2, which is called insulin insensitivity. That means the cells which is not minding or which is not control of insulin, that time you will get type 2 diabetes. Or insulin resistant, that phenomena is called insulin resistance. The blood glucose level which is again gets rise, insulin secretions increases in an attempt to compensate, which is lead hyperinsulinemia. Means in order to control the tissues, you are going to inject more amount of insulin, that is called hyperinsulinemia. So hypoglycemia, which is again hyper means excess glucose amount present in the blood, hypo means a low amount of glucose which is present in the blood. The dramatic drop in glucose in blood level, that is called hypoglycemia. Symptoms of similar to an anxiety attack, rapid weak heartbeat, sweating, anxiety, hunger, trembling, weakness, etc. are the symptoms if you are getting hypoglycemia, which is rare in healthy people. It may occur as a result of purely managed diabetes or other causes, which is a reactive hypoglycemia, fasting hypoglycemia. There are two types, which deals with the glycemic index. That means a measures of the extent to which A food raises blood glucose concentrations and elicits an insulin response compared to pure glucose. That means low, moderate, high, these three category of food product available. If you eat pasta, baked beans, bran cereals, apples, milk, etc., it will produce low glucose level. If you eat like banana, orange juice, ice creams, will produce moderate glucose level. Whereas if you eat white bread, cornflakes, potatoes, jelly beans, watermelon, etc., will produce high glucose level in our blood. That is called glycemic index. Deals with sugar, intrinsic sugar from intact fruits and vegetables, whereas added sugar, which is saccharides added to foods, beverages by manufacturer, cook or consumer. Free sugar, the added sugar plus concentrated sugar, that is from honey, syrups and juices. Why sugar is added to food? Because if you add sugar, there are few things may happen. The one is to get flavor enhancement. The another one, provide a texture and color. The third one is it permits fermentations. And the fourth one is it is added as bulks. And the fifth one is act as a preservatives. Of course, it is balance acidities. These are all the very important function if you add sugar into your food products. Risk of excess consumption. So following risk can be expected if you consume more amount of sugar. Number one is nutrient deficiencies can occur, and also development of dental caries also possible if you are taking more amount of sugar, and development of type 2 diabetes, obesity, etc. may possible, and also hyperactivity in children's possibility, which if you are consuming more amount of sugars. So reducing risk of caries formations. Eat sugars food with meals always. Limit between meal snacks containing sugar and starches. Brush and floss teeth regularly. If brush and flossing not possible, rinse teeth with water or chew sugar-free gum. These are all possibly you can reduce the risk of caries formation. Which is again nutritive and artificial sweeteners. Nutritive sweeteners, that means which is give nutrients while eating those nutritive sweeteners, which is important sweeteners and provides energy, which includes natural sweeteners, refined sweeteners and sugar alcohols. From these things we will get nutritive sweeteners, whereas in case of refined sweeteners, that composed of simple sugar extracted from other foods, that will give refined sweeteners. Non-nutritive or artificial sweeteners are important sweetness but provides a negligible amount of energy. It will give sweet but it will not give energy. That is the difference between nutritive and non-nutritive sweeteners. Sugar alcohol. Example of sugar alcohol are like sorbitols, mannitols and xylitol. That and all comes under alcohol category. Considered sugar replacers. Use similar amount as sugar and provide about 2 kilocalories per gram. Only found in commercial foods, common in chewing gum. Bacteria that produce cavity causing acid don't metabolize sugar alcohols. Artificial sweetener again, which is made it in the laboratory, are synthetic sweeteners. Number one is aspartame, that means 200 times sweeter than sugar, which is yields 4 kilocalorie per gram, made of 2 amino acids, especially phenylalanine and aspartic acid. These two things will give aspartame. The individuals with PKU genetic disorder cannot convert into phenylalanine to tyrosines effectively, which increases in blood phenylalanine concentration can be toxic. Again, artificial sweeteners. Artificial sweeteners, another categories, which is saccharin and acesulfame K. So saccharin, which is one study found that excess may cause bladder cancer in rats, but longitudinal human studies shows no support for saccharin causing bladder cancer. That means saccharin as such not producing any cancer, but using artificial sweetener which is not good for health for long-term effect. Whereas acesulfame K cannot be digested by the body of, thus provides no energy also. and not affected by heat, so can be used in cooking, and which is 200 times sweeter than table sugar. Artificial sweeteners, again sucralose, made from sugar but doesn't contribute to energy because it is not digested. Approved by US FDA 1998, used in Canada since 1992, sold under trade name of Splenda, which is 600 times sweeter than the table sugar, which is the highest level of sweetness. How much carbohydrate do I need to survive? So AMDR adult, approximately it is 45 to 65% of total average energy intake, whereas RDF or carbohydrates around 130 gram per day for adults. In case of daily value, for 2000 kilocalorie diet, 300 grams per day. For fiber content, men 38 grams and women 25 grams. In case of sugar, maximum 10% of energy intake. Carbohydrates in the diet increases complex carbohydrate intake, whole grains, legumes, vegetables. Eat more breads, cereals, pasta, rice, fruits, vegetables, legumes. Eat fruits and vegetables with the peel. Add fruits to muffins and pancakes. Add legumes to chisels and mix this as a meat substitute. Sugar recommendations. TRI recommends that less than 10% of average daily energy intake should be from sugars. Tips for limiting sugar intake. Use food labels, determine amount of sugar in products, and use ingredient list to identify multiple sugar source and add it to the sugar. Use less added sugar. Limit soft drinks. Choose sugary cereals, candy. Choose fresh or frozen fruits. So students, let us summarize what we have learned in this module. Sources of carbohydrate, especially simple sugars and complex carbohydrate, dietary fiber, all these things we have studied with more examples. And digestive and absorption property also we studied, and especially function of carbohydrates. It acts as energy and which is substitute for carbohydrate, something like that. We learned many things. And the blood glucose regulations, also one of the prime important function also we studied. And the dietary sweeteners, dietary recommendations we studied in extensively.